Hello, and welcome to part 2 of our 3-part series, Demystifying the Cloud, where we'll be sharing our thoughts and experiences to hopefully help you make a success of your cloud adoption journey at every stage, to help you find your path to success on the cloud. I'm Matt. I'm a principal software craftsman from Codurance. I'm joined again by my colleague Rodrigo.
Hi, I'm Rodrigo. I'm the head of platform engineering for Codurance.
Great. So in this video, we'll be digging into the migration phase itself. So Rodrigo, what are some of the challenges you think you've seen different teams facing during cloud migrations?
Well, there are probably many of them to discuss. I think we can't get off them this video, but I think that's the first thing, and just remembering a little bit of the previous video when we tried to identify the strategy. I think that some of the clients, they sometimes misunderstand those strategies. Some of them, they usually come with the idea of rehosting or just doing a lift and shift. And then when we start to run some sessions with them, some workshops, then we find out that they actually need to do a little bit of refactoring before migrating, because sometimes the applications, the legacy applications are so old that they are not kind of cloud friendly, if I can put it that way. So I think this is one of the first challenge that we have, to review the strategy and see if that fit for purpose. I think from the first one, I don't know if you remember, this is one of the clients that we've been with.
Yeah, I remember. I think also there's a danger, I think, that some teams fall into of over engineering, right? I think there's lots of different services on different cloud providers these days that you can do all different types of things. I think having access to those services can be a bit overwhelming. And so I think I've certainly seen teams that have found it hard to know which services to use for their own use case. And so I think there's a danger that you can, if you're not careful, kind of start to use all these different services and go down the route of kind of over engineering your cloud migration if you're not careful.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, that's very common. When you have a lot of options, sometimes you don't even have a huge menu on the restaurant, and you don't know what to choose. Then you can start to get a bit lost. And I think that's where I think the skill, there's a kind of a skills problem that surge, or that one, as because you have too many services, and at the same time, just by understanding the components that you have available on for example, for a lift and shift solution, you're probably going down to the lowest level of the cloud architecture. So you start to play around with the what we call infrastructure as service, the IaaS. And then it's quite difficult to find people with this set of skills, because there are so many different technologies I need to understand. I think the basic ones are around compute, networking, storage, and then the ramification of options that you have in those three categories is really huge. And then I think that there was an article from Gartner talking about it. Now, one of the main challenges in 2022 is the shortage of skills around IaaS to support lift and shift migrations, and also probably the time that you need to spend to retrain or upgrade the knowledge of your internal team as well. This is actually another big challenge that most of the companies that face.
Yeah, I think the skills one is kind of quite a big area, isn't it? And kind of the skills gaps and understanding the skills that you're going to need to make your cloud migration a success. How do you think teams can go about trying to address that? Do you think either kind of upfront before the migration, or even kind of before, sort of during the migration, if needs be?
Yeah, I think probably that there is one thing that you need to try to understand before it. I know that there's a lot of uncertainties at the beginning of the project, so it's difficult sometimes to understand all the components they're going to use and all the skills necessary to help the project to be implemented. But of course, if you some things that you can predict, for example, most of the organizations, they know, for example, which cloud provider they're going to use, right? So if we're going for a specific cloud provider, it's good to have some training on that specific technology for the cloud provider. And usually you have different perspectives. You can come from the general solution architecture perspective to help to design the solution, and a bit more technical ones as well.
But yeah, I think that can be a useful thing to consider. I think if it's your first time doing this, having someone alongside you who's done there before, knows some sort of pitfalls to look out for, and some patterns that have worked well can be a useful thing to leverage.
Definitely.
And how about, do you think, just thinking about managing the migration, if you like, so sort of timelines and risk and things like that, and how might, do you think, teams manage risk, for example, during a migration project?
Yeah, the first thing is actually have proper, well-defined, again, coming back to your point in previous videos, coming with some well-defined strategy and requirements, of course, helps, but you do have uncertainties. So in terms of controlling those potential emergent change that you may have through the project, it's good to put some governance in place. Then you can easily, or not easily, but you can put this in place to identify any deviations and why we would have it, and how we may need to change our strategy to accommodate, or our plan to accommodate those changes. And of course, that would be good to understand now from your requirements perspective, what kind of priority for each one of the objectives that you're setting. So going through a prioritization exercise, it may be good, in case you need to release something more important before, we can leave like the less important things and more complex things for later. So I think that usually helps as well to mitigate the risks, or at least deal with the unavoidable risks.
Yeah, definitely. I think also it's worth mentioning, I think, automation as kind of a way of verifying that you're progressing in the right direction, i.e. that things are working as you'd hoped, right? I think as you step into a cloud migration, maybe the level of testing required is quite small, and maybe you can get away with doing it manual, but the more things you migrate to the cloud, like the more test cases you're going to have, and so you're going to find that quite unwieldy after a while. So I think investing in automation upfront is going to be a useful time saver for you, if nothing else. But I think it also gives you the confidence that you've got a process that's repeatable and reliable in terms of verifying that the things that you are doing are correct, and your application and components are still working as you expect.
That was a good point. To mention automation and testing, because usually as an outcome from these mechanisms that you implement, you can collect data as well, and that can help you to align with your KPIs and understand if your implementation is going well or not. And also at the end, probably show, have some evidence that the benefit is being realized. Coming back to that point that we discussed about how we ensure that the objectives were met and the benefits were realized.
Yeah, definitely. I think that sort of perhaps leads into a little bit around reporting, I think, right? So I think it's important to get into a cadence of not only regular reporting, but I think like transparency around the migration process. So is the business able to see into the migration process and see the benefits that are on show from the migration, but also is the team able to escalate problems and blockers quickly, and so the business can then kind of figure out what to do in those cases, whether that be rethinking their technical vision, whether that be sort of reaching out to partners for support or cloud providers for support, so that they can get timely help when needed.
Definitely. Communication is key, isn't it?
Yeah, very, very much so. Yeah. I guess we talked a bit about different approaches to migrations before, and also in the previous video too, we talked about the 6 R's, right? How do you think, as a team, sort of going through the actual migration process themselves, and they're implementing their chosen migration path, if you like, how might a team keep a check on whether they've chosen the right approach for their migration? So if they've chosen, for example, a rehost or a replatform, how might they determine whether that's actually the right solution for their problem space?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think that's again, coming back to our first question that we discussed, the alignment between your strategy and the understanding of the strategy of the 6 R's and which one they're choosing. I think the first point that would be to revisit the strategy and again looking at your the plan to implement that strategy and see if they will help you to meet the objectives. I think that you need to look at your from the technical perspective, from the business perspective, understand if your architecture is fit for purpose. If the solution that you're choosing in the cloud is going to really work and really going to support the business, your business objectives. I think that would probably be the first one. And again, coming back to the point where we may have some mechanisms in place to collect data as we go and identify any deviations that we have in the plan and correct that as soon as possible and see how we can incorporate that into our migration strategy. So yeah, having the proper mechanism to collect and show the KPIs and control that, having some governance around it is probably one of the most important things that you need to put in place to ensure that delivery.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's really key. I think I like the idea of fitness functions for architectures, right? So that we hopefully define some characteristics that we want our systems to exhibit, whether that be security, performance, or whatever else that might be. And so I think if we're able to define those up front, again, that should be backed by business goals, like you said. But if we can kind of bake in mechanisms for collecting and then observing how they're playing out in our cloud provider, in our new platform, hopefully they will give us a sense of are we moving in the right direction, or have we chosen the wrong technology choices for our particular problem. So maybe, for example, we've chosen to use a serverless function for a particular sort of long running task, when actually that's not really the right sort of technical choice for that particular piece. So I think your point is really good. I think it's really key to bake in observability and monitoring and metrics from the outset, isn't it?
Yeah, and sometimes you can use most of the cloud providers. They usually provide a set of best practices as well that may help you to understand in advance if that service is fit for purpose for your solution or not, and also some cost calculators as well. So if cost reduction or cost optimization is one of your key objectives, they can also help you to calculate that in advance and see if that makes sense or not.
Yeah, definitely. I think it's all about, I think, like I said before, defining those KPIs almost, if you like, as part of the migration, and putting in mechanisms for collecting and surfacing those metrics, whether it be performance related or cost savings, optimizations around cost, and keeping an eye on those as we're going along and reporting on those things. Great. Okay. So keep an eye out for the next video in the series, video 3, where we'll be sharing our thoughts on how you can make the most of being in the cloud. So we'll see you then. Thank you. Bye.
Yeah.